Right, so we want to continue on in the fourth parak here in Yoma. Uh, Last week we talked about the Goralot, how the Goralot were taken by the Kohen to determine which seir, which goat would be used for Korban Chatat and which would be sent off to Azazel. And the second vidui of the Kohen Gadol with his par. So let's just look at that part for a second. It'll lead into what we're going to do today. Right. So after he in the second Mishnah, so it explains that after he determined which seir would be which based on the goralot, then he would tie a strip of crimson on the head of the seir that was going to be sent off, and the one that was going to be slaughtered he would tie around its neck where it would be slaughtered. Then it said Balo Etzel Paro, then he would come next to his par, Etzel Paro Shnia, and then he would Samech Shtei Yadav Alav Umitvadeh. He would lean his hands on it and he'd say a vidui. And now we're on Mishnah Gimel. Shchato, so then he would slaughter it. The kibel b'mizrak et damo. So we learned about the slaughtering earlier that he would do, this would be the same thing, where he would do the kosher shchita. The kosher shchita is to slaughter most of the windpipe and the jugular vein. And then he would hand off the knife to another Kohen so that he could immediately take a kli to capture the blood, because that's also an avodah. And the second Kohen he could cut more to finish off the shtita, but it's kosher after you cut rov of the kaneh and the veshet, the windpipe and the jugular vein. So now it says shchato v'kibel b'mizrak et damo. He would shecht it, he would slaughter it, and then he would capture the blood in a mizrak, which was a vessel used for capturing blood. U'netano l'mishehu mimares bo. He would give that to the one who would be stirring it. Al harovad haravi'i shebehechal, on the fourth rovad. Actually, after all this, wait. So we'll see what a rovad is. A rovad is just like a wide step. So it's a wider than normal step. And we'll go into that a little bit. I prepared something from Midot to explain this. Kadei shelo yikrosh, so that it wouldn't congeal. The thing is, so what's his problem? The problem is he's not going to use this blood immediately, because this has to go inside of the hechal. Normally, right, we saw before in the Sechet Tamid, like when you shach the Korban Tamid, a Kohen would capture the blood, and then he'd walk over to the Mizbeach, which was very close by, and he would sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach. But that was the outside Mizbeach. This blood is going to get sprinkled inside. So it's not going to get sprinkled immediately, and we don't want it to congeal, right? Once it's congealed, you can't sprinkle it anymore. So once he captured the blood, he would hand off this mizrak that held the blood to another Kohen, and he would stand on the fourth rovad of the hechal, and stir it. He would be memares bo, is the language of the Mishnah, so that it wouldn't congeal before the time the Kohen Gadol needs to actually use it. And we'll get in a little bit to the thick of that in a moment. no pun intended. Natal machta v'ala l'rosh hamizbeach. Then he would take a machta, which we understood before. It's also kind of like a little shovel, and he would go to the top of the mizbeach. That's the outer mizbeach. Ufina gechalim elach ve'elach. He would move um, the coals here and there. V'chotam min ha'mu'ukalot hapanimiyot. And then he would scoop up from the inner coals that were eaten, that were digested. In other words, the burnt coals, right? Because those will be the hottest burning coals.
The embers.
V'yarad v'hinicha al haroved haravi'i sheba'azara. Then he would go down and place the machta on the fourth rovad that was in the azara, that was in the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash. So let's understand the nuts and bolts of this. This gets interesting in different ways, but let's first look at the Bartanura. So Shchato v'kibel b'mizrak adamo netanol mishim memares bo. Bartanura explains memares megis umenaer uma'arev bo. He would stir and move it around and mix it up, shelo yikpeh, so that one would not congeal, kisheyishhe ad she'aseh avodat haktoreh, while it's waiting until he does the service of the incense. Right? So this is the order that he has to do it. He has to shech this bar, take its blood, and then he has to do the ktoret. So he's not going to sprinkle the blood until later. So somebody needs to stand there and stir it. Al haroved ha'revi'i. So he explains, Kol shura b'shura shel avnei haritzpa kruya roved. Every line of the stones of the floor is called, each line is called a roved. Right? So it's like a line of stone. V'yefshar lefaresh roved ha'revi'i shebehechal. Right? In other words, the Mishnah says ad al haroved haravi'i shebahechal, on the fourth rovad that was in the hechal. So the Bartanura says the language here is not exactly what you would think. You can't explain this to mean the rovad that was inside of the hechal. Shura revi'it shebetoch ha'echal mipetach ha'echal v'lifnim, which would be the fourth line of stone that would be inside of the Heichal, from the entrance of the Heichal inside. It can't be that. The Haktiv, B'chol Adam lo yeh ba'ol hamoed. Right? We learned that in our studies. In Achremot, it says, here's the pasuk: "V'chol adam lo yeh ba'ohel moed, b'vo'o l'chaper b'kodesh ad seito." No one, right? So there's a gzerat katuv. The pasuk says, no man can be in the Ohel Moed when he comes in, when the Kohen Gadol comes in, L'chaper b'kodesh, to do the atonement inside of the holy place, ad seito, until he leaves. V'chiper bado v'ad beito v'ad kol kahal Yisrael. So, what's going on? We have this Kohen who has a mizrak that he needs to keep stirring. The Mishnah sounds like it's saying that he has to go inside of the Heichal and continue stirring there on the fourth line of stones. But the Bartanura says it can't mean that, right? Because the Torah tells us that no one else can go into the Kodesh, nobody else can go into the Heichal during this time. Ella Tani Roved Revi'i Shel Heichal. But rather, the way we need to learn this Mishnah, it's as if it says on the fourth rovad of the Heichal. What is that? Klomar, that is to say, Roved Haravi'i Sheba'azara. It's actually the fourth Roved that's in the courtyard. Kishiyotze min ha'heichal la'azara, moneh et harivadim. Kishiyotze, when, it means here, when one would exit the heichal to go to the azara, he would count the rivadim, he would count these rows, umenicho al haroved haravi, he will place it on the fourth roved. B'sham omed hamimarespo. That's where the person, the Kohen who is stirring the blood, is going to be standing. Ti'ilu b'toch ha'echal efshar, right? Because it would, if you say it would be inside of the heichal, that's impossible, right? We would prove that that can't be what it means. Kedamran, as we explained. Now, I'm going to go into this a little bit more, and I'll show you. I want to look to understand this better at the Mishnah in Masechet Midot. But while we're here, let's just finish the Bartanur on this Mishnah. So after the Shchita of the par, the Kohen Gadol himself would take a machta and go up to the top of the Mizbeach. He would move the coals back, move them around here and there, and then he would scoop up from the inner burning coals. The Bartanur explains, "V'choteh et hagechalim." He would scoop or dig or scoop the coals, meniach et hamachta, and then he would put the machta down, ad shiachpon b'chofnav haktoret v'yitain letoch hakaf, until he goes and he's going to take handfuls of the ktoret and place it into the kaf, which is the kli that's going to hold the ktoret. Yachar kach yachnis kaf umachta lifnim, and then afterwards he's going to bring both of those things. He'll bring the shovel, the machta that has the coals, and he'll bring the kaf, which is this other large kli that's going to be holding the ktoret, and those he's going to bring inside. Those will go all the way inside. Okay, so where was this Rovad Haruvi? Let's take a look for a moment at the Mishnah in Midot. And interesting enough, this Mishnah, there are different interpretations of it. I'm going to go with the way I understand it, actually mainly from the way Albeck explains it, because I think it's the simplest way to understand it. So the Mishnah here, the Mishnah Midot, which we looked at before, is all about the structure and the measurements of Har HaBayit and the Beit HaMikdash. So at this Mishnah, we're in the third parak in the sixth Mishnah. So it tells us, "Hakiyor haya bein ha'ulam v'lemizbeach, u'mashuch klapei hadoram." So the kiyor, which we've discussed many times, that was between the ulam and the mizbeach, but it was pulled southward. In other words, it wasn't necessarily literally in between the mizbeach and the ulam, but it meant it was in the space. It would be in the space that's defined by the space between the mizbeach and the ulam. And the different pictures of this, the different renditions of this, that we've looked at before. They're not necessarily to scale, and you can see in different pictures the kior may be a little bit this way, it might be a little bit that way. I think now, I just recently saw that I think somebody actually did a book which 40 years ago, I thought I would do this book myself, but of course I never got around to it. But somebody did an accurate rendition of these things. Okay, we're not so concerned right now about the kior. Bein ha'ulam v'lamizbeach 22 ama. So now the space that's created between the ulam and the mizbeach is 22 ama. So let me just bring up. Let's look at a picture of this anyway, just to get our bearings. Um, this is the picture according to the Tosos Yom Tov. Okay, so roughly here's the Mizbeach. Here is the Ulam. Now, I think we've talked about this before. One of the reasons that this picture is funny, at least according to the way we're accustomed to seeing pictures like this, is because it's playing with the dimensions and the point of view, right? Some of it is a direct overhead view, some of it is sort of from a side view, and some of it is from a directly side view. So I see I see Michael Schwartz is nodding his head. It's just really interesting how that works. We also, I think I've showed you some of the pictures that the Rambam himself did because we have them from his own manuscript. And for the most part, his pictures are one dimensional. Like he doesn't play with this, but sometimes he also does. This idea of using perspective and dimensions doesn't really, actually by the time of the Tosas Yom Tov, this was something that was well known in the art world, but it doesn't really come into like Western art until around the time of the Renaissance, I think a little bit before. And you've probably also seen these like medieval maps, right? The cartography that was done back in the day. And they also play with these kinds of things. It's kind of interesting for us to look at. So, for our purposes, all right, so here we see this is the Mizbeach, this is the Ulam. This area here is the Ulam, and this is the entrance to the Ulam. Actually, I can make this a little bigger. And then we see there are these stairs that lead up to the Ulam. Now, the plain pshat of the Mishnah and Midot is that the measurement between the edge of the Mizbeach, this is the western side of the Mizbeach, between here and here, that was 22 amot. Okay? So now, so what was so within that space, now we're going to talk about the stairs that lead up to the Ulam. And I don't know if you've ever learned Masechet Midot. Michael, Schwartz, did you ever go through Masechet Midot?
Yeah,
You have.
yes. And also
And yeah, and I mean, we haven't done the whole thing, but we've done some of it. I'm curious, the sources that you use, but they have illustrations of one sort or another, I imagine.
mostly what I used was the Gahati, but I don't think there was an illustration like this. I'm looking at, I have illustrations and up from other places.
Okay. Um, let's go back for a minute to the Mishnah. We'll sort of go back and forth here. So the Mishnah, and then I have my own illustration, which I made up. So Ben ha'olam v'lamizbech 22 amah. So that's that space. In other words, that's the space of the floor of the azara that's between the ulam and the mizbeach. That measures 22 amot. Now, u'shtei mesre ma'alot hayu sham. There were 12 stairs there. Rum ma'ala chatzi amah. The height of a stair was a half of an amah. The shilcha amma, and then the stair itself, like where it goes out, that was one amma. So it goes up a half an amma and then an amma, right? Half and one. Amma, v'rovid shalosh. So an amma, and then there's a roved, there's a line of stone, that's shalosh, that's three ammot. V'amma, v'rovid shalosh. There's another amma, and then a rovid shalosh. So it's talking about not the height, right? Because the height of each of these stairs is the same. They're always half an amma. So you go half an amma, and then an amma, half an amma, and then an amma, half an amma, and then three ammot. Okay? Um, Amma v'rovid shalosh, amma v'rovid shalosh. V'ha'elyona amma v'rovid arba. Rabbi Yehuda omer ha'elyona amma v'rovid chamesh. Okay, so let's count this. So here, we'll count this out. It tells us that there are 12 stairs. So first of all, we understand that the height that you're going to go up from the floor of the azara to the opening of the ulam is going to be 6 amot, because you have 12 stairs. Each one is a half an amma in height. And if you learn earlier in the second parak, the Rambam actually draws a detailed side view of all of Har HaBayit, and he shows you how you start down here and how you go up into the Ezrat, how you go up Har HaBayit into the Ezrat Nashim, and then so on and so forth, because each from the entrance from the entrance to the Ezrat Nashim until you get to the Ulam, there are several sets of stairs. It goes up and up and up. It's not all lying flat. The Ezrat Nashim is flat, then you have to go up some stairs, and then you go to the Ezrat Yisrael, and you go up some stairs, and then the Azara, the Ezrat Kohanim, and then you have to go up some stairs, and you're in the Ulam. And this is also significant for other reasons. There has to be a way for the Kohen who's doing, when they did the Para Duma, and he's on Har Zeitim, looking at the Beit HaMikdash, he has to be able to see all the way to the Petach of the Ulam from where he is. So maybe sometime we'll look at that in a little bit more detail, but it's a very interesting engineering and architectural structure in this regard. Okay, so for our purposes, just in this one part, there are 12 stairs. And this is what we know. Shtemes Ma'alot Hayusham. Each one was a half an amma high, and each stair is one amma wide. Amma v'rovid shalosh, amma v'rovid shalosh, va'elyona amma v'rovid arba. Okay, so now here there's a little bit of a problem in the way this is worded, because the way it's worded, you don't get 12 stairs, right? Because it goes one amma. In other words, so now we're talking just about the stairs themselves. 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 3, the Elyona, and then the top one, or it's the top set, is 1, 1, 4. So how many stairs is that? 1,
Uh,
1, 3. What? Say
9.
it's 9. So there's 3 missing. So with the way we're going to understand it is that when it says ama ama v'rovad shalosh, ama ama v'rovad shalosh, but it's implied that there's a third one like that. There's an implication. The repetition implies another one. So the way it would look, based on this reading, I made a kind of crude drawing which I keep playing with. It should be something like this, and I hope this is understandable. It's not a good drawing. Okay, but here, starting down here, hang on. See if I can get my little arrow here to point. No, that's not an arrow. Wait, happen. Yeah. No, no. Why isn't this working? All right, I'm not going to try to use this. It's too bad. Um, I made these indications. I'll try to make a better picture of this, but okay, if you start from here, you start from this point. So the numbers that are in circles are the numbers of the stairs. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 stairs. And that we see is that that every third stair is a rovad. That it's a rovid. It's what we would call the rovid. So we go up a half an amma and over an amma. This is obviously the side view. Up an amma, over an amma, half an amma, over an amma, and then 3 ammot, and then again, and then again, and then I get up to here and I do 4. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is 5. So I did 4 and 1. Okay, so according to this understanding, from here to here, which is the Tanakhama's understanding, this would be 21 amot. And the whole area between the ulam and the mizbeach is 22 amot. So it means that there would be a space of an amma in front, down here, and then you would reach the ulam. And according to Rabbi Huda, this is 5, so it means that actually there is no space down here because this is exactly 22 amot. Well, there's a space, I mean, you can get to it, but this takes up the whole width of the area that is the area between um, the Mizbeach and the Ulam. And Michael Schwartz, I see you're looking. Do you have any pictures there you want to share?
Yeah, I have a picture. It's just in the back of the Gemara of Midot. And so, yeah, I'm looking at just different pictures. Um, uh, yeah,
Can you hold it?
I can hold it up, but I don't know what you can see. I'll try.
Yeah, try anyway. I'm
Okay.
curious.
All right. Let's hold on. Let me unmute so that I have two hands.
Good. Let's see if
Um,
we can. Here, wait, I think I can highlight you. Hold on a second. No, let's see if that works. All right. Okay. Wait.
yeah,
Okay.
maybe
Can
let
you
me actually yeah, move it
hold
up
it up
because
a little higher?
yeah. So you see them as Mizbeach, and then the stairs, and then there's the Ulam on top. I don't know if you can see
Uh-huh.
the
Oh, it's
door. I don't
okay.
know.
So I see they made their stairs like into a rectangle.
Yeah.
Okay. This is also not clear, and there are different opinions about that. Um,
Whether it's
anyway,
rounded or square.
yeah. So here, when we look at, let's go back to Tosis Yom Tov. Now,
He-
the way he has it, and I'm not sure to what degree the Tosis Yom Tov actually orchestrated this picture. Right? I don't think he actually did it. This was done by the printer, and this printing, this is actually this is from a modern printing from the Oz Hadar edition. But what they did is I know they took this particular illustration from the Vilna edition from the ninth because I have that edition. Um, yeah, so they have it going out like this, and then I've seen other iterations of it. But now we understand when we're looking at this picture, the whiter areas, that's supposed to be the rovad. Now but see the way it is in the picture, it is more like the way it says in the Mishnah, where it talks about having it goes ama and rovad ama and shalosh ama shalosh and then ama and arba. But according to this iteration, the ama it's actually it would have to be ama and aba, right? In other words, you have to have in order. It is only three ruvadim. There are only three ruvadim. There's one, two, and three, which is the plain understanding of the Mishnah. But the way I did it, there's four ruvadim, which is another way of understanding the Mishnah. And hang on one second. I didn't print this up for everybody, but hang on. I don't have to read this to you, but basically, the way I explained it is the way Albeck explains it. And this way, the way if we go with the way with this explanation, so now I have four rovdim. I have four revadim, and not three. And so when we come back to our Mishnah, there is a Roved Revi'i. There's a fourth Roved. So which is the fourth Roved? So this is what we saw. The Bartanura says, Al HaRoved HaRevi'i, Kol Shura V'Shura Shel Avnei HaRitzpa Kruya Roved. Every line of stones that's on the floor that people step on wherever they are, that's called a Roved. V'yefshar lefaresh Roved HaRevi'i Shebeichal, that we understood. And he explains all that. Klomar harovet harivi. So here he says Klomar rovet harivi sheba azara. So really, what the Mishnah means is the fourth roved that's in the azara. And what is the fourth roved? Kishiyotze min haichal la'azara moneh et revadim. In other words, it's the fourth roved down, coming from the heichal to the azara. That's the way he understands. So it would be coming from the azara, um, coming from the azara. It would be the first roved, right? It would be this one here, which in a way makes the most sense because basically we don't want him to spend a lot of time getting somewhere to continue stirring. He's when he comes here, he's close to where the par was shechted. I'll remind you that the shchita for this for these animals was done somewhere around here. In other words, it was done very close to the stairs. It was in between the Mizbeach and the Lulam. And it was special for this day because we didn't want the Kohen Gadol to have to strain himself, so we try to keep things close. And so basically the blood would be captured, be'erach here. He would hand the blood off to somebody, and he would sit, he would, I always thought that I imagine he sit, but he stood, because no one is allowed to sit in the Beit HaMikdash except for Malachim from Beit David. Only kings of the line of David are actually allowed to sit in the Mikdash. Everyone else stands. So he would be here. So that makes sense. I mean, here, except that here in this iteration there are only 3 Revadim. Okay. So you can imagine there are different ways of understanding this. There's different ways of understanding that Mishnah and Midot, and there are different ways of understanding exactly what's going on. But this, to me, seemed to be the easiest way to understand it. So a little bit technical, but I think it all makes sense, right? Basically, par gets shechted, captures the blood, hands it to a kohen. He walks up 2 or 3 stairs, whatever it is, and he stands here waiting for the blood to be used. And then what happens? The Kohen Gadol goes over to the Mizbeach. He walks up the ramp of the Mizbeach, and then he pokes around and he takes coals for the Ktoret from the Mizbeach. Now, the Mishnah, in a moment, it'll talk a little bit more about that. When we learn Masechet Tamid, in Masechet Tamid, we learn that every day there are 3 ma'arachot. There are 3 fires going on the Mizbeach. And just as before we get to the next Mishnah, which is going to talk about this, should we use this one? Yeah, we'll use this one. So if you remember here, the grid area here, that's the main ma'aracha. That was for the Tamid, and this is where the Shnei Gizrei Etzim would be placed. And then there was a smaller ma'aracha on the opposite side, which is the western side, right? This is the eastern side. This is the west, and it's in the corner, it's in the southeast corner. And this one is on the western side, and it's removed, it's supposed to be about 4 amot away from the southwest side. And this is where the coals would be taken for the Ktoret every day. In the middle is the Tapuach, which is the mound of ash. And then there was going to be another one, which is not illustrated here. There would be a third ma'aracha here on the north side. But as we'll see in a moment, there are different opinions about how many ma'arachot there were every day and how many ma'arachot there were specifically on Yom Kippur. So let's look at that Mishnah. This is the next Mishnah, Mishnah Dal. B'chol Yom haya choteh b'shel kesef. Every day he would take the coals, he would scoop the coals with that of silver. In other words, with a machteh of silver. Uma'areh b'toch shel zahav. And then he would pour it into a machteh of gold. Vayom choteh b'shel zahav. And today he would take the coals with a machteh of zahav. Uba haya machnis. And he would go inside with it. Okay, so if you remember, we learned this back in Tamid, and I didn't bring this up, but hold on a second. Well, we'll come back to it. We'll come back in a minute. But basically, it's describing what we learned in Tamid, that he would scoop with one, and then he would pour the coals into another one, right? And then we talked about, because then some of them might fall off, and those would be pushed into the Amma, which was like a little stream next to the Mizbeach. So that's what it's talking about here. V'chol yom choteh b'shel arba'at kabin uma'areh b'toch shel shloshet kabin. Every day he would scoop with 4 kav, and he would pour it into one that was held 3 kav. So that's why some of them might not all make it, right? Some of them might fall off. Vayom choteh b'shel, and today on Yom Kippurim, choteh b'shel shoshet kabin uva haya machnis. In other words, the machteh itself was 3 kabin. It held 3 kabin, and that's the one he would bring inside. So there are 2 differences. That b'chol yom he'd be choteh b'shel kesef, and then he'd pour it into a golden machteh. And the machteh shel kesef would have been 4 kabin, and the machteh of zahav is 3 kabin. And today he just takes one. It's shel zahav, it's gold, and it holds 3 kabin. That's the one he's going to bring inside to use for the Ketorah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, b'chol yom choteh b'shel sa'ah, not 3 kabin, not 4 kabin, but a sa'ah. Umareh b'toch shel shoshet kabin. But he would use that to pour into one of 3 kabin. Hold on a second. Let's remind ourselves of the midot here. So a sa'ah held 96 reviyot. It held a sa'ah held 16 kav. I'm sorry, 1 kav is 16 reviyot. So lo nachon. 1 sa'ah would hold 6 kav, right? Because 1 kav is 16 reviyot, and 1 sa'ah is 96 reviyot, right? 6 times 16, 96. So Rabbi Yossi is saying that actually the machteh that was used every day wasn't one of 4 kabin, it was one of 6 kabin. And he could scoop up twice as much as what he needed and he would pour it into the but he agrees it still gets poured into one that's only um, 3 cup. Wait, I lost my place here. Okay. Do you see the Mishnah now? Okay, thanks.
Yes.
So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Choyim Choteh b'shel Sa'ah u'mareh b'tol shel shoshet kabin. That's what would do on it. That's what the Kohen, not necessarily the Kohen Gadol, but that's what a Kohen would do every day. V'hayom choteh b'shel shoshet kabin uvahaya machnis. So this part, he agrees with the Tanakama that today he's going to be choteh with a machteh of 3 kabin, and that's the one he's going to use. B'chol yom kveda. The machteh that was used every day was heavy. The hayom kala, and the one that he used today was light. B'chol yom aita yadak tzara. The one that he would use every day had a short handle. Vayom aruka. The one that he used today had a long handle. B'chol yom aya zahaba yarok. The one that he used every day that was gold, its gold was yarok. Now yarok is a funny word. I don't know if we've talked about this in shiur. In modern Hebrew, just say yarok is green. It's probably, and there are other places in the Mishnah where yarok is used. Like if you learn Masechet Sukkah, it talks about um, like one of the Mishnayot that talks about Tetrog. It says it shouldn't be yarok kekarti. It shouldn't be as green as a leek, as a karti is kresha. It's a leek. So we know how deep green a leek is, but by dint of the fact that the Mishnah says yarok kekarti, it means that stam yarok is not that deep green. And there are other Mishnayot like in Nida and elsewhere where it seems that stam yarok was probably in the range of yellow-green. It was yellowish green. Now, I don't know. I used to know, unfortunately, he's since passed away, and I'm not in touch. I wasn't in touch with him even the last few years, but there are people who know about not just metallurgy, but the history of metals and the history of materials that know much more than me. And I assume that they know which kind of gold this is, what they mean by this gold. But it was what I assume what it means is it's a kind of a yellowish gold. It doesn't mean it's green, but it's probably more on the yellowish side. Choyom haya zahava yarok, v'hayom adom. And today it was red. In other words, more on the reddish orangish side. Divrei Rabbi Menachem. That's how Rabbi Menachem held. B'chol yom makriv pras b'shacharit ufras bein ha'arbaim. Every day he would bring a pras, a half of the measure in the morning, and half of the measure bein ha'arbaim. And we all know this from saying Pitum Aktoret, Pras B'Shacharit, Pras Ben Harabayim. Yom Mosif Melochatnav. Today he adds a handful, his handfuls. B'chol Yom Haita Daka. Every day it was fine, the Ktoret was fine. V'hayom Daka Min Hadaka. Today it was the finest of the fine. Okay? So this is a little digression to talk about the differences regarding this part of the procedure of doing the Ktoret. So we learned the basic procedure back in Masechet Tamid, that the Kohen would go up, the one who won the pais for the Ktoret, he would go up, he would scoop the coals in the Machteh Shel Kesef, Then he would pour that into a machteh of zahav, and then he would take that and the Ketoret go inside, and he and the guy who's going to, guy is maybe not a very mechubad word, the Kohen who would go, the Kohen who would do the menorah, right? They went in at the same time to do their work. Now the Kohen Gadol has to do all of this by himself today. So one of the reasons, so what would be a reason why today he's only going to use one machteh? And he's not going to do this whole thing with pouring from one to another.
It's easier, less work.
It's easier and it's less work. And also, like we said, every day the machteh was heavy, and today it was light, presumably for the same reason, right? In other words, we're trying to reduce the amount of work that the Kohen Gadol has to do today. So let's look at the Bartanura here. B'chol yom, כשחוטא גחלים ממערכה שנייה של קטורת, להכניס על מזבח הפנימי לקטורת שחרית וערבית. Every day when he would scoop the coals from the second ma'aracha, right, which we saw in the illustration, that's the one that's on the western side. It's the second ma'aracha toward the west. That was the one that would be used for the Ktoret to bring to the Mizbeach Hapnimi to do the regular Ktoret for the morning and the evening. Choteh b'shel kesef, mareh b'shel zahav, ve'eino choteh b'shel zahav, and he wouldn't do the scooping with the golden one. Why? Shechatiyat ha'gchalim shocheket hakli u'mechasarto, because that scooping is going to rub away at the machteh, and it's going to reduce it, or it's literally going to take some of the gold of it off. But Torah chasa al mamonan shel Yisrael. The Torah is concerned about the money of, like the property and the money of Bnei Yisrael. In other words, the Torah was concerned that we shouldn't lose money for for no good reason. By the way, does anybody know the source for that? How do we know that the Torah is Chasam Mamonan Shel Yisrael? I have a feeling that you've come across it at some point that you may not remember.
I came across it, I don't remember.
That's okay.
This fits in the category of vaguely familiar, but it's not percolating up to this.
Yeah, so that's what happens to all of us. That's why doing Chazarah is so important, and it's something I try to remind myself every day. But and I think I must have told you this, that it was said of the Ragachaber that that he had this phenomenal command, this phenomenal bikiyut of all of Shas, and it was actually testified about him that he would go through all of Shas in as little as 2 weeks. He would go through all of Shas. That might be an exaggeration, but it wasn't much of an exaggeration. It was that's the way he was. And I read an article once about someone who knew the Ragachaber, and he said people thought that he had a photographic memory. He says, but that's not the case. The reason he could quote things is because he just saw them. He had just, like, he saw it within the last few days, and that it was always fresh in his mind. So we should all be zoche to have that much concentration that we can keep reviewing the things that we learn. Anyway, we learn it from the din of Bayit HaMenuga, right? So when a house has a nega, when a house gets tzara'at, the Torah says that before you call the Kohen to decide if it's tzara'at or not, you're supposed to remove the kelim. And the indication is because why? Because if the Kohen comes and he declares that the house is menuga, that it has tzarat, so then the house itself is mitameh, and all of the kelim, all of the klei cheres will be tameh. Everything. So in a kli cheres has no, there's no way to be metaher, you have to break them. So from there we learn that chasa Torah al mamonan shu Yisrael. The Torah is concerned that people shouldn't stam lose their kelim, and it directs them, take them out. It's a very interesting concept because it also implies that the two, because you might say, well, but if he comes in and he says it's tamei, but that was tamei before he came in, but that's not the case. In other words, the tuma isn't chal. The tuma doesn't actually have a force. It doesn't come into force until it's declared by the kohen, and the Torah gives you a way of avoiding losing your kelim. So here also, so that extends to many, many things. It's also, I can tell you, it's brought down in the beginning of the Keseta Sofer, that Sofer has to be extremely careful, that if you're too machmir when you're paskening something about a mezuzah or tefillin, that if you're machmir and you're stumbling, you shouldn't stum be machmir to say something is pasul, because then you're mafsid mamonan shel Yisrael, right? You're just causing somebody a monetary loss because they'll have to go get new tefillin or a new mezuzah. So it has implications in many, many areas. And so here also, we see that on the one hand, we want to use this machtev zahav, as we've mentioned, in other places, because we want this kind of, because it's kavod for the Beit HaMikdash, right? And on the one hand. On the other hand, they didn't use it every day for just doing the plain scooping because it's going to wear down, and gold is very expensive, and it's not going to last forever, right? Whereas silver is much less expensive. So you would use the silver one every day, and then they would just pour it into the gold one. The gold one then wouldn't get rubbed. It wouldn't be rubbing against the coals all the time. It would just be accepting coals from on top.
Plus, the gold is a much softer metal.
It is a much softer metal. Oh, and you mean so it would wear down more quickly, right?
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Yeah. So this is what I was thinking also, and I really do need now to find somebody to talk more about this, because I remember talking about this with this fellow. He was actually an Israeli fellow, but he lived in the States for a long time. He was a great expert in metals, and I remember having a bit of a discussion about this with him, because if the menorah is described as being from zahav tahor, from pure gold. Now, if the menorah was really made from truly pure gold, it wouldn't be able to stand like this. It would droop because the metal is too soft. It wouldn't hold the shape. It would have to have been mixed with something. I remember having this discussion with him. So this idea of pure gold and what it meant in the Torah, it's not immediately clear. Here, in any event, there's no mitzvah that the zahab would have to be pure gold. The idea was just that they wanted something that looked nicer. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't know anymore. I'm just raising the questions.
Plus, I mean, plus the red and the green or yellow suggest it's some kind of alloy. Like red would be iron, and maybe the green would be copper.
Might be copper. I don't know. I don't know enough about metallurgy to tell, but yeah, presumably it's mixed with something. And of course, silver also is a very soft metal, and that's why it's also always mixed with something. I think you're correct, though. I think that gold is softer than the silver, but
I mean, that's why gold is hammered. Like you'll
that's why
see.
gold is hammered. Right, it's
Yeah.
hammerable. Actually, silver is also hammerable. You can make silver leaf just like you can make gold leaf. And the reason it wasn't used in manuscripts is you can guess why. Because the silver tarnishes and the gold doesn't tarnish. But in my years of study as a calligrapher, I actually bought some genuine silver leaf along with some genuine gold leaf. And I also bought some aluminum leaf because aluminum leaf looks like silver, but it's a lot cheaper.
Although aluminum used to be considered a precious metal.
Yes, right. When it was first started, I think back in the 19th century or something, it was still
So
considered.
actually, the top of the Washington Monument is made out of aluminum, in part because it's something expensive and precious, or it was.
Right, right. Nachon. And actually, aluminum also tarnishes, but it doesn't blacken. It just sort of gets it gets sort of a whitish
It
color. It
just
goes up.
it gets dull.
It gets dull, right? It looks dull. So it doesn't make the same impression. But both of you have been in my house. You may remember I have hanging on my wall a piece I did a long time ago, like 40 years ago, with three olives, and it's a midrash about the letter aleph. And one of them I did in silver leaf, and one I did in gold leaf, and one I did in regular ink. And so the silver leaf, I treated it with a varnish so that it wouldn't discolor. And it's held up for a long time, so that worked. But back in
This
the day, yeah,
this reminds me of Merchant of Venice.
reminds you of?
Merchant of Venice. They're the three coffers, the three boxes, one of gold, one of
Oh,
silver, and one of lead.
okay, let's get back to this.
I've
Vayom,
seen, I've seen different shades of gold in the lab, and it also is a function of the surface finish, how it's prepared, and how the surface is. So it could be composition, but it could also be on the surface how it's made.
very interesting. Very, very interesting. And of course, all colors are affected by the colors that are next to them, whatever they are, right? Right, colors change when you when you change the colors that surround them. But that's interesting, right? So you have it's all, it's not just the alloy; it's also the manner of preparation. Very interesting. Um, Vayom choteh b'shel zahav. So today he would do the scooping with that of gold. Shelo lahatriach al kohen gadol la'arot mikli el kli. Right. So he did it with one kli, so we wouldn't trouble the kohen gadol that he would have to pour it from one to the other. Every day the machteh was kveda. It was heavy. Shahayad dofna aveh, because its wall was thick. Vayom kava sheyad dofna dak. Today its wall was thin, right? And so, in other words, the point is that every day. So why did they make it heavy for every day? Why didn't they just make it thin all year round?
It was more durable. It was heavier.
Presumably, it's more durable because they're using it every day. These kelim he's only using them on Yom Kippurim. So for a day, it's not a problem. Every day the handle was short. V'hayom arukat kedei shetei zroa shel kohen gadol mesayeto. It was long enough that the the kohen would have to use his forearm to support it. Now, I think the reason that it was long, though, was also it would make it easier for him to scoop. Right? He wouldn't have to bend in as much to scoop. Um, every day the gold was green, or it was yarok, with the yellowish green. Vayom adom mizahav hakarui zahav parvaim. It was made of a gold that was called parvaim, al shem shedomeh ledam parim. It was called parvaim because it was like the blood of bullocks. And every day he would bring pras b'shacharitu pras ben arbaim, which was a chatzim maneh, half of the maneh, half of the measure. And today, mosif melo chafnav. Today he would add in a handful. Every day it was daka, and today's daka min hadaka. Dichtiv melo chafnav ktoret samim daka. Right. So this is what we learn when we learn in Parshat Achrei Mot, when it talks about the Ktoret. This is the pasuk. V'lakach melo hamachta gachalei esh ve'al mizbeach mifnei Hashem. So he would take a full machteh of coals, of fire coals, from the altar that's before Hashem. Umelo chafnav ktoret samim daka, and a handful of, or a fistful, yesh lomar, that of fine incense. Vehevi mi beit laparochen, and he would bring those things inside of the parochet, right, into the Kodesh Kodeshim. So what's the problem? We already know that the Ktoret is dak, because V'lo kvar ne'amar, didn't it already say? When we learn about the mitzvah of Ktoret in Parshas Kisisa, it says v'shachakta mimena hadek, that you're going to grind from it so that it thin. You're going to grind it fine. Right, in that pasuk, you know, v'shachakta mimena hadek, v'natata mimena lifnei ha'idut v'yoel moed, asher yiva'ed lecha shama kodesh kodeshim tiyeh lechem. Right, so that's from Parshat Achrei Mot. One second. Ela lomar lecha shektoret shel Yom HaKippurim tehei daka min hadaka. So why does the Torah go back and tell me in Parshat Achrei Mot, melo chafnav ktoret samim daka? Why does it say daka? To tell me that the ktoret of Yom HaKippurim has to be daka min hadaka. Has to be the finest of the fine. There's a lot of interesting things here, and I this is one of the things that I would like to take a diversion on. I don't think I'm going to do it now because I think the best thing is for us to push on. But one of the things that I do want to come back to when we finish the whole first 7 chapters, I would like to come back and do the Ktoret with you, so that you understand, like when you're doing Pitum Ktoret, let's all understand what Pitum Ktoret is. And there's a very interesting history to the nusach of Pitum Ktoret, and what it and how that came about, and there's different versions and so forth. But so I won't go into it now. But this already, right? You're familiar with these phrases from Pitum Ktoret, and this is at least some of the meaning, right? So on Yom Kippurim, he has to go back and take melo chafnav, and it has to be and it had to go back and it had to be grinded again, pulverized again. So because it was daka min hadaka, so now we see this is one of the sources for that. B'chol yom kohanim olim b'mizracho shel kevesh. So we're continuing on comparing what was done every day in the Beit HaMikdash and what was done by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. Every day, Kohanim would go up on the eastern side of the ramp up to the altar, v'yordin b'ma'aravo, and they would come down on the western side. Vayom Kohen Gadol ole ba'emtza v'yored ba'emtza. Today, the Kohen Gadol goes up in the middle and he comes down in the middle. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the Olam Kohen Gadol Ole Be'emtza V'yorei Be'emtza. Rabbi Yehuda said, actually, that's how the Kohen Gadol did it every day, to show that he was special. B'chol Yom Kohen Gadol Mikadesh Yadav Ragav Min HaKiyor. Every day the Kohen Gadol would wash his hands and his arms and his legs from the Kiyor, like all of the other Kohanim, as we learned in Masechet Tamid. Bayom min hakiton shel zahav. Today he would wash them from a pitcher of gold. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Le'olam Kohen Gadol Mekadesh Yadav Ragav Min HaKiton Shel Zahav. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, that was something that was special for the Kohen Gadol every day. Every day when he washed his arms and legs, he would always do it from a Kiton Shel Zahav. B'chol Yom Olim B'mizracho Shel Kavesh. And why does a Kohen normally go up on the eastern side of the ramp? Damar Mar Kol Pinot Shata Poneh Lo Yehu Ela Derech Yamin. Right? We learned this also earlier. We learned it in Masechet Tamid. All of the turns that you turn should only be toward the right, on your right. Shehula Mizrach, and that would be on the east. In other words, of course it's a relative direction, right? But when we look at the placement of the mizbeach inside of the Azara, so we understand, right? Once again, this is the eastern, down here, this is the eastern side. So this is, oops. And here's the Kavesh. So he goes up the eastern side of the Kavesh, because when he's facing it, that is his right. It's not that east is always right, but relative to where he is to the Mizbeach, the eastern side is right. And when he goes down, he's going to go down on the western side. Whereas the Kohen Gadol, oops, right? But the Kohen Gadol is going to go up the middle and down the middle. Now, let's go back for a moment to the Mishnah. The Amar Kol Pinot Sheta Poneh Lo Yuhu Ela Derech Yamin Shehu LaMizrach Sharei HaKavesh B'Darom, because the ramp is in the southern part of the Azara. The Kacholin B'Mizracho Shel Kavesh. That's why you go up on the eastern side of the Kavesh. Shesamuch Lifnot Liyamin. That is close by to turn right. In other words, that's where that would be your right. By Yom Kohen Gadol, on this day, on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, Mishum Kvodo, out of honor to him, goes up in the middle and comes down in the middle. Harot Chashivuto. This is to show his importance. Shehu Kiven Bayit. He is like a member of the household in front of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, as it were. There's Kiven Bayit v'holech b'makom shu chafetz, and he goes where he wants. Masha'en sha'ar kohanim misha'im la'asot kein. That which other kohanim are not allowed to do. So it's an interesting thing, right? Because you might say, if the basic idea is that kol pinot shetaponeh lo yuhu ela derech yamin, you would think that should apply to the Kohen Gadol too, right? In other words, there's an idea that whenever you're taking a route, you should always start from your right, and that's not necessarily. The Kohen Gadol is the exception. So just from here in the Bartanur, the implication is the chashivut of the Kohen Gadol overrides that idea of turning right. That turning right doesn't take precedence over the honor that is due to the Kohen Gadol. We need to show that the Kohen Gadol is special. Why might you think that we would like to see the Kohen Gadol as a ben bayit, as a member of the household, as it were? Why would we want people to see the Kohen Gadol in that sense on this day, on Yom Kippur?
Well, I mean, he can go into the house's inner chambers.
Yeah. As the Bartimer says, he can go B'makom shu chafetz, he can go at any place that he wants. Now, of course, we know that walking in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he can't go willy-nilly into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. He has to go under certain conditions. But like Michael, like the way you say, but nonetheless, he can go there, and not everybody can go there. So it means that he is special that way. He is a Ben Bayit in a way that no other person in Bnei Israel is like that as a Ben Bayit.
So
So this part
in a
is the outside. We can see it, in other words, everybody who's there can see this from the outside by the way he goes up the outer Mizbech and comes down the outer Mizbech. I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
it's not.
What?
I think it would be. It's not that important. I think in a royal court, he'd be the equivalent of like a gentleman of the bedchamber.
Like a gentleman, I didn't hear the last part.
So in royal courts in Europe of a certain period, there was what was called the gentleman of the bedchamber, and
Oh,
these were
okay.
nobles who were so close to the king that they tended to the king. They tended on the king in his bedchamber, and they could.
That's very interesting. You may remember we had a discussion about this a long time ago when we learned Masechet Ta'anit, and we talked about Choni Hamagel. So I'll leave that for discussion for now, but that's a very important. I think that's a very relevant point. Very interesting. So yes, he's something like that. Except I might say that he's even more than that. In other words, I think the idea to me that sounds more like what Rebbe Yochanan ben Zakkai describes himself as like a sar bifnei hamelech, that he's like a minister before the king. And Choni HaMa'agel is described by Shimon ben Shetach as a ben bayit. So the ben bayit has, in a sense, more freedom. He can go really where he wants. Even I would think that even the gentleman who could go into the bedchamber, but he doesn't get to go whenever he wants. It's just that he is allowed to go in to that intimate space. And I understand that's a parallel to the Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. But I think the idea of the Ben Bayit is even more intimate than that. That's that's what I would think. Um, let's do this. There's 5 minutes more. I'm going to read this part, but I think some of these things we'll go over again next time. And I'll try to supplement a little bit more before we, not a lot more. Like I say, some of these things we'll come back to in greater detail later. But let's just do it because we're almost at the end. We'll in fact what we'll do is I'll just read the Mishnah. Next week we'll do this Mishnah. We'll go into this a little bit more about the Marachot. B'chol yom ayu sham arba ma'arachot. So the Tana Kami here starts off not like the Mishnah that we learned in Tamid. It says here every day there were 4 ma'arachot. There were 4 places on the Mizbeach where there was a fire going. V'hayom chamesh, and today on Yom Kippur there were 5 ma'arachot. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'chol yom shalosh. That's the way we learned in Tamid. Every day there were 3. V'hayom arba, and today today on Yom Kippur there were 4. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chol yom shtayim, which is actually the illustration that we saw according to the Tosot Yom Tov. He only had 2 ma'arachot. That would be like Rabbi Yehuda. V'hayom shalosh, and today is 3. So let's stop here. We'll look at these next week. We'll look. The Bartanur brings the basic psukim that are the basis for the machloket. There is a longer discussion about this in the Gemara, like there is most of this other thing. But we'll go through the Bartanur here and maybe a little bit of supplementary stuff, and then we'll move on to the 5th chapter. So I think that's it for today. Any last comments or questions or things you want to say? No? Okay. Great. Everybody
Great.
have a restful evening.
All right, great. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Light
Bye
it.
bye.
Bye bye.